Screams rang out in a green clearing beneath a tall tree, illuminated by the sun's rays. 3 sisters were fleeing in panic from a huge, killer bear. The eldest carried the youngest on her back, while the middle sister was panting with exhaustion. The youngest screamed that the beast was already very close, while the eldest, gritting her teeth, said they had only one choice: to use the spell they had heard about. The sisters stopped and, in desperation, began the ritual. The middle one, with blue hair, said, "Key of Heaven," while the eldest, with scarlet hair, said, "Key of Earth." The blonde with blue eyes added, "Key of Dimensions, grant our wish." A magic circle flared before them, and a bare-chested man with broad shoulders and long hair pulled back into a bun emerged from the light. He had a deep scar on his forehead. The sisters froze and cried out that this was their savior. Some time ago, the arena was abuzz with the finals of a major sumo tournament. The crowd roared with delight as 2 wrestlers faced off in the decisive match. A referee oversaw the bout, and in the center stood Takarayama, an undefeated Ozeki. With a booming cry, he pushed his opponent out of the ring. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the referee confirmed the victory. His opponent, a yokozuna, approached, patted him on the shoulder, and congratulated him. The referee declared Takarayama 1 step closer to the grand champion title. Takarayama closed his eyes, imagining the day when his dream of becoming a yokozuna would come true. Suddenly, someone tapped him on the shoulder. He looked up, and instead of the arena, he saw before him a huge bear, twice his height, with spikes on its back and drool dripping from its fangs. He looked around in shock. The ring was gone, surrounded by forest. The girls nearby realized in horror that their summoning had succeeded, but they were out of mana. The middle one shouted that instead of a hero, they had summoned a naked man. The youngest didn't believe he could defeat the monster. Takarayama watched their altercation silently, unsure where he was. The elder woman said the ritual had worked and there was no turning back. She pointed at the wrestler and ordered him to attack. He asked, perplexed, how he, unarmed, could deal with such a beast. The bear dropped to its front paws, ready to attack. Takarayama clenched his fists. There was nowhere to run, and the girl stood behind him, trembling with fear. He assumed a stance and felt a surge of strange power. Numbers flashed before his eyes. The bear's stats appeared before him: attack, defense, agility, and the poison claw skill. He realized he could see his opponent's status, as if in a game. Recalling the past, he quickly assessed the situation. As the beast lunged forward, Takarayama struck it in the jaw with his wrist, then with his other hand, lifting the bear's body upward. Maintaining his position, he straightened his opponent's spine and knocked him down sharply. The sumo wrestler pinned the monster's head to the ground and held it there, tensing his muscles with all his might. The girls watched in amazement. Takarayama delivered the finishing blow with his forearm, breaking the beast's neck. Blood trickled down his arm, but he didn't let go. When the bear's body went limp, the sisters gasped. The elder one proudly declared that their magic had worked, and Takarayama, breathing heavily, merely smiled, relieved that no one was hurt, even though he had no idea where he was. The younger sisters, confused, asked their eldest what to do with the summoned one. She smiled nervously and replied that he would probably simply return to his home. She thanked the man for saving them and said goodbye. Takarayama, seeing them waving goodbye, became indignant and approached, asking if they could take him back. The girls froze, unsure of what to say. They noticed his wound and tried to heal him, but the magic was barely aglow. The middle one, lowering her voice, admitted that this was their first summoning ritual. The girl bowed and introduced herself. Takarayama remembered her name, Iris. The elder and younger sisters began arguing over who was to blame, until Iris ordered them to apologize. Takarayama raised his hand, asking for an end to the argument. Eliza, clasping her hands, sincerely apologized for dragging him into this. He simply smiled and said the main thing was that everyone was alive. Franca grumbled that the spell had failed, but her sister chided her, claiming it was everyone's fault. Takarayama, listening to them, looked around: strange trees, warm air, unfamiliar animals. The world seemed alien, yet alive. He lowered his head, remembering the ring, his father, and the day he would become a yokozuna. The old man's face appeared before his eyes, wishing his son luck and believing in his strength. Eliza sadly admitted she couldn't undo the ritual, and now he was stuck here. Takayama noticed their guilty expressions and tried to defuse the situation. He said he didn't regret it, having saved them from death. Eliza promised to find a way to bring him home, but Iris noticed he was still wounded. She tried to heal him again, but to no avail. Takayama wondered if the local magic was affecting him. Then he decided to check his own status, and lines appeared before his eyes. He was 28. He had no magical stats at all. Instead, he had new skills, status reading eye and Chanko recipes eye. He frowned, not understanding what all this meant. The girls gasped when he told them he could see his own and others' statuses. Eliza explained that in their world, this was impossible without special guild artifacts. Franca enviously asked if he could see theirs, too. He looked at them, and before his eyes lit up, Eliza, 18 years old, fire magic, Iris, 15 years old, water magic, Franca, 14, wind magic. The sumo wrestler froze and asked what the numbers meant. Eliza blushed and stepped between him and her sisters, shielding them with her body. She nervously stated that the status had even begun to show body measurements, and, upon hearing Frankie's question about weight, she brushed it off sharply, claiming that it was a system error. Takayama realized from the shouts that they were talking about size. But he was more alarmed by the yellow health indicators. Eliza showed him a basket of bread, explaining that they were almost out of food. He was surprised to learn that they had gone into the forest without supplies. Franca, pouting, blamed her sister. Eliza angrily ordered her to shut up. Franca muttered that it all started with her losing at the casino. After that, she borrowed money from a shady man, and the next day they had to flee the debt. Takayama merely nodded silently, unsure of what to say. They added that it was during their escape that they encountered the killer bear. The sumo wrestler sympathized with them, 3 children in an alien world without food or money. He watched them share their last piece of bread and looked for a way to help. His gaze fell on a bundle nearby. Unfolding it, he sought his things and wondered how they had gotten there. Among the items were dishes and knives, as if they had been transported with him. At the bottom lay a round jar with the inscription Chanko for Yokozuna. Takayama froze, not immediately comprehending what it was and why it, too, had entered this world. Eliza asked curiously what the strange jar was in his hands. Takayama replied that he didn't know. The girl snatched the jar and tried to open it, but the lid wouldn't budge. Then the man tried it himself and the lid turned easily. Inside was a fine powder, similar to ash. A notification lit up before his eyes. Chanko recipe, beginner level, had been activated. It included a description of the ingredients and preparation method. Eliza noticed the man's thoughtfulness and asked what he had seen. He glanced at the killer bear's carcass and pronounced its name out loud. Eliza was surprised, as that was what this monster was called. Then Takayama decided to ask her about a few terms, hoping to gain some insight into the world he'd entered. He asked about the full moon mushroom, and Eliza explained that it grows at the roots of old trees. She explained that the scarlet mushroom appears near full moon mushrooms, and that the herb Miranda is used against poison. The girl pointed to it at their feet. The man praised Eliza for her knowledge, and she, smiling proudly, confirmed that she was an excellent expert in herbs. Franca added that whenever they give away free ingredients, Eliza is always the first one to do so. The sumo wrestler gathered enough plants and mushrooms for cooking, then turned to the defeated bear, deciding the meat would be useful. The girls watched in bewilderment when he announced he was going to cook a killer bear for dinner. Iris cried out that no one had ever eaten a monster. Takayama calmly replied that bear meat might be tough, but it was perfectly edible, and there was enough carcass for everyone. The girls exchanged glances, but the man was already flexing his arms and getting ready to butcher the animal. He said that he hadn't cooked for a long time and loudly announced, "It's time to make Chanko." He cut up the meat and sliced the mushrooms with confidence and speed. Eliza noted his excellent technique. Takayama explained that he used to be responsible for the fighters' meals and prepared Chanko every day. He explained that Chanko is a nutritious stew that sumo wrestlers eat together as a family. Chan means father, and Ko means child.
It's a symbol of their unity and strength. Memories flooded back.
He saw himself in the old hall, carrying a heavy pot of broth.
His apprentice laughed, saying that the young should cook, but Takarayama only smiled and placed the food on the table.
They ate together, and the student, his mouth full, praised the dish for its taste.
The memory was cut short when Eliza reminded them that they couldn't cook anything without fire.
The girl confidently waved her hand, creating tongues of flame over the fire.
Takarayama thanked her and explained that meat paired better with miso. Eliza didn't understand what he meant, since they didn't have any.
At that moment, the jar of powder began to glow. The man opened it and saw that the contents had changed. He tasted it, despite the girl's cries warning him of danger.
The taste was familiar, it was miso.
He smiled, realizing the jar was no ordinary one.
Adding its contents to the broth, Takarayama declared the dish ready.
A fragrant nabe with killer bear meat simmered over the fire.
Eliza was surprised by the pleasant aroma, though it was hard to imagine the monster in the bowl.
She was the first to try the chanko. The flavors melded perfectly, the broth was rich, the meat tender.
Franca also scooped up some and beamed with delight, while Iris looked on in utter bewilderment. Eliza noted that the nobi roots were crispy on the outside but soft on the inside. Franca admired the soup's thickness.
Takarayama explained that this was due to the scarlet mushrooms in Miranda, which softened the meat's flavor and removed the odor. After tasting the chanko, Eliza and Franca froze for a moment, then their faces lit up.
Eliza scooped up a piece of meat with her spoon, admiring the taste and appearance of the dish.
But her delight quickly turned to horror when Takarayama calmly announced he was eating bear's small intestine. The girl paled, but he merely smiled. Iris was perplexed at how they could calmly enjoy something that had recently been growling and trying to kill them.
Takarayama held out the bowl to her, inviting her to try it.
When she hesitated, he insistently repeated that she needed to eat, too. He explained that a monster ceases to be a monster when it becomes food. It's food that will give them strength and help them survive. He prepared chanko for precisely this purpose and asked them to eat it without fear. Iris quietly took the bowl, took a sip, and was surprised to find the broth hot, thick, and unexpectedly delicious. Takarayama watched her with satisfaction. Later, he noticed Eliza laying the younger siblings down by the fire and sitting up herself, wearily rubbing her leg. He asked if she was in pain.
Eliza admitted she'd carried Iris almost the entire way through the forest. Takarayama offered to give her a massage.
She was initially embarrassed, thinking he was joking, but he simply calmly remarked that it was wrong to take care of others while neglecting yourself.
After some hesitation, Eliza agreed.
When he carefully took her leg, he noticed the swelling. She blushed, feeling awkward, and he began to massage her muscles, explaining that fatigue couldn't be ignored. She let out a quiet gasp when he pulled her foot, while he was telling her that the body has its own eyes and ears that need to be understood in order to feel energy. Takarayama added that pain is a sign of life, and if she feels it, she's healthy. Eliza was surprised, as she'd never heard such a thing before. He explained that sumo wrestlers take meticulous care of their bodies, as strength comes not only from the muscles but also from the spirit. His memory flashed back to his father-like mentor. It was he who had cooked him fish before his final tournament, believing his student would return victorious. For this man's sake, Takarayama wanted to become a yokozuna, to fulfill his father's hopes. Now that his dream had come true, he felt he had to return home. Eliza looked at him with her eyes downcast. She felt awkward, because he had saved them and continued to help them, and she didn't know how to repay him. She firmly declared that somewhere in this world there had to be someone who knew how to bring him back. Eliza promised that they would search together and not leave him alone. Takarayama thanked her, though he didn't believe it was possible. Then she voiced her plan: they would open a restaurant. Grabbing his hand, she enthusiastically said that people from all over the world would come to try Takarayama's dishes. With his skill and her organization, they would find the right person. In the morning, they set out on a journey following the map. Eliza led the way with a lantern, followed by Iris and Franca, and Takarayama bringing up the rear, carrying a bundle of belongings. On the way, he explained that he was an Ozeki wrestler and had recently been promoted to Yokozuna. But that day, as he stood in the ring, he suddenly woke up in an alien world, face to face with a killer bear. Now he understood that he had been summoned by three sisters Eliza, Franca, and Iris, desperate to save their lives. The spell had worked, but they couldn't bring him back. To avoid starvation, they were forced to cook the monster's meat. Takarayama, remembering his rank as Yokozuna, vowed to return home at any cost. Eliza suggested using his culinary skills to attract the attention of the world's powerful. She envisioned a restaurant serving Yokozuna dishes that would attract travelers, merchants, and even magicians, and among them, there would surely be someone who knew the way home. The man was hesitant, but her confidence was infectious. He decided to trust her and agreed to go with her, even though he had no idea where it would lead. Still, doubts persisted. He asked where exactly they were headed. Eliza replied that beyond the forest lay a port town, which was where they were headed. The map indicated they were on Kashima Island, and the sisters themselves hailed from the Ori Temple district. Their goal was to reach the coastal town of Haben, where they could board a boat and sail to the Noir continent. On the way, Iris told them that their older sister, Cornelia, lived on the continent. Takarayama was surprised to realize that Eliza only had 4 sisters. The thought of a large family brought a slight warmth to him. After all, in his world, he himself had almost no family left. But a flicker of irritation crossed Eliza's face. She replied curtly that she didn't rely on Cornelia. Takarayama assumed their relationship was strained, but seeing Eliza feeding the younger children and lovingly adjusting their clothes, he realized she treated her family with genuine warmth. The sky suddenly darkened, and he became wary. Eliza quickly realized why they had entered the shadow of the hovering Yggdrasil. Takarayama raised his head and froze. A huge tree hung above them, its crown reaching into the clouds. He couldn't believe his eyes and asked if he was mistaken. Iris replied that it was indeed Yggdrasil, but only a sapling. Eliza lit the lantern with a flame from her palms, illuminating the way with a soft glow. The girl explained that the floating Yggdrasil grows only on this island and is considered the source of all life. According to ancient legends, creatures of all races first appeared in its branches. Takarayama listened with interest until Franca suddenly screamed she had stepped on something. A man lay face down beneath her foot. He groaned in pain, and the girls recoiled in fear, thinking they'd stumbled upon a dead body. But the man stirred and hoarsely asked for water. Receiving the flask, he drank greedily, letting drops trickle down his chin. After catching his breath, he thanked them and introduced himself: Brown, researcher of monsters and rare creatures. When asked why he was lying half dead in the forest, Brown explained that he'd hired a guide, but he'd run off, leaving him alone. Franca snorted, calling him a loser, for which Eliza immediately reprimanded her. At that moment, Franca became wary. She sensed someone approaching. A huge insect flew overhead. The girls screamed, shielding themselves with their hands. Brown instantly recognized the creature. It was a Yggdrasil honey fly. Franca's eyes lit up. She knew their honey was a rare ingredient used to make cosmetics and serums for the nobility. Even simple soap made with this honey was considered a royal luxury. Takarayama looked at the girl in surprise, but she merely shrugged, explaining she'd read about it in a magazine about the lives of stars. He flipped through the pages, marveling at the bizarre customs of this world. Meanwhile, Brown explained that these insects build nests right in the roots of Yggdrasil. Hearing this, Franca happily remarked that the honey seemed to be right nearby. The next second, a loud explosion shook the ground. Everyone turned to the source of the sound and saw something enormous flying out from the roots. A giant raven was rapidly approaching them. Takarayama's status window popped up: beak strike I, sharp claws I. The prey list listed feathers and meat. The creature was falling right on them. The sumo wrestler quickly removed the bundle and prepared to act. He rushed toward the bird. The girl screamed, but Takarayama, clutching the feathers, began to climb upward, trying to change the trajectory of his fall. As the raven nearly touched the ground, he grabbed it by the neck and twisted its head to the side. The creature fell beak first, raising a cloud of dust. Eliza exhaled in relief. Brown recoiled, looking from the carcass to the wrestler.
Takarayama wiped the sweat from his forehead, feeling his breath return. He leaned over the fallen raven, wondering why it had fallen. Brown assumed the bird had been blinded by the darkness beneath Yggdrasil and had lost its bearings. But suddenly the raven opened its eyes and rose abruptly, spreading its wings. The creature soared into the sky, leaving everyone stunned. Takarayama was relieved that no one was hurt. Franca, however, noticed a piece of nest nearby, glowing with golden honey. She joyfully showed the find to the others. Takarayama guessed that the raven had hit the nest while falling, breaking off part of the honeycomb. Franca began searching for more pieces, and Brown turned pale, warning that more would come. He felt a slight vibration in the air and became wary. A distant buzzing sound was heard. Soon, a flock of enormous honey beetles burst forth from the branches of Yggdrasil. Takarayama saw their status: insects with a level 1 stinger and an ultrasonic roar. Their loot list included royal jelly and feathers. Iris noticed that the flock looked exactly like the one that had flown overhead earlier. Brown, turning pale, explained that after a nest is destroyed, honey creepers become enraged and attack everything living. Parting the bushes, he ordered everyone to stay low and seek cover. Eliza dragged Iris under the nearest thicket, but, turning around, she realized with horror that Frankie was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Franca, ignoring her sister's cries, was collecting pieces of the nest. She was sure the honey from it was worth a fortune. Takarayama jumped up, grabbed her by the shoulders, and, shouting, handed her to Eliza, telling her not to let go. Eliza hugged the younger one, and Takarayama was already turning to face the approaching honeybees. The first wave of insects swarmed him. The man moved swiftly, batting them away with his hands, as if he were slicing through the air with his fists. But there were too many of them, he knew he couldn't hold out for long. Then Brown burst out of the bushes, shouting for Takarayama to jump into the river. Not immediately understanding which river they were talking about, the wrestler looked back and noticed the glimmer of water behind the trees. He dashed toward it, leaping over roots, and plunged into the stream, followed by a gush of honey plants. Brown turned to the girls, asking who wielded wind magic. Franca raised her hand, though she was trembling with fear. He ordered them to act on the signal. While Takarayama was diving, Brown removed the flask from his belt and ripped off the cap. Eliza urged him on, begging him to hurry. Waves from the bees' wings were already visible on the surface. Brown threw the flask straight into the swarm and gave the signal to Franca. The girl gathered magical energy, raised her palms, and a powerful gust of wind scattered the powder through the air. The honeybees lost their direction, colliding with each other. A roar filled the forest, and soon the swarm flew away. When Takarayama emerged, the water was silent. He exhaled loudly, realizing he was saved. The girls ran to the shore. Iris asked if he was okay. Takarayama smiled and thanked everyone for their help. Franca asked what Brown had thrown into the swarm. He explained that the honeybees were blind and navigated only by smell, and the flask contained a mixture of spices that had impaired their sense of smell. He added that the basis of these spices was the black crystal fruit, a rare fruit found only in this forest. Franca, her eyes shining, still held the piece of honeycomb and clearly had no intention of parting with it. Eliza, noticing this, sharply asked why she was holding that honeycomb. Franca indignantly replied that it was a rare cosmetic ingredient, and throwing it away would be a crime. While she was discussing its benefits for the skin, Takarayama thoughtfully examined the honey and remarked that it looked edible. As his fingers touched the honeycomb, a notification popped up: a new recipe had been discovered. Takarayama froze in surprise, while Eliza and Iris exchanged glances, unsure what was happening. He smiled, realizing he could make chanko from this. Eliza immediately became interested in the new dish, while Franca panicked and hid the honeycomb behind her back, declaring she wouldn't let anyone touch her beauty elixir. Takarayama calmly replied that he still had some meat left, mentioning that he'd buried part of the bear's carcass, wrapping Miranda in grass. Alisa was surprised he'd carried so many supplies. Franca continued to insist she needed the honey to look like celebrities. Eliza approached her with a gentle smile and unexpectedly snatched the honeycomb from her hands.
Explaining that the honey on her skin wouldn't do any good unless she ate it, she handed the find to Takarayama, ordering him to prepare it.
Franca threw up her hands in indignation, but it was too late. Takarayama grabbed his bundle of things and the honeycomb, preparing to cook. He gathered everything he needed and began preparing the new chanko.
First, he soaked the fruit to remove the bitterness, then crushed the honeycomb and added it to the pot along with the water and fruit. Then he lightly fried the meat with crystal spices and added chopped nobi roots.
The aroma gradually filled the air.
Looking into the pot, he thought that soy sauce would go perfectly with the honey. Everyone watched him warily.
Then he remembered the mysterious can of Yokozuna Chanko and said loudly, "Soy sauce."
The can glowed softly, causing the girls to scream.
When Takarayama opened the lid, there was indeed soy sauce inside. He nodded contentedly, he now understood exactly how the can worked.
Brown, amazed, muttered that this was probably a unique magical artifact created according to ancient recipes.
Eliza asked Brown what a unique item meant.
He explained that it was an artifact that only a person with special characteristics could use. Such things are common among monsters, but extremely rare among humans, and those who possess such items are considered a select few. These words gave Takarayama pause. He remembered the inscription on the jar Chanko for Yokozuna and realized that perhaps the artifact really was connected only to him.
Franca immediately suggested trying the jar herself, but Takarayama waved it off, reminding him that dinner came first.
Thick steam rose from the pot, the dish was ready.
A new creation stood before them, a rich sukiyaki with killer bear sauce.
Eliza smiled happily, Franca mourned the loss of her celebrity life, Iris cautiously reached for a spoon, and Brown, smiling nervously, prepared to try it. When Takarayama took his first sip, his eyes lit up, the combination of the sweet honey and the salty sauce was sublime. He explained that sukiyaki is usually sugared, but the honey adds depth to the flavor. Eliza savored the sweetness, a sweetness she hadn't experienced since leaving the city, and Iris noted the delicate tartness of the crystalline fruit.
Franca, grumbling, ate in silence. Takarayama generously poured out more until the pot was empty.
Over the meal, they told Brown how the three sisters had accidentally summoned him from another world and now didn't know how to bring him back. The scholar listened attentively and then began explaining the basics of magic. It's activated through the power of spirits, with whom people are connected from birth. From this, Takarayama realized why he himself was incapable of casting spells. He had no spiritual patron, being an outsider to this world. Brown confirmed his suspicions, adding that without a connection to the spirits, even the simplest spell was impossible. He explained that complex rituals required several spirits, and therefore required a great deal of dedication. The summoning spell likely didn't work perfectly because one of the sisters lacked magical power. The girls hung their heads, feeling guilty.
Eliza asked if there was a way to bring Takarayama home, but Brown was confused, magical theories weren't his specialty. Takarayama reassured them, thanking them for their effort. Brown then asked a practical question, did the wrestlers still have any meat from the killer bear? Takarayama was surprised, but nodded. He led the researcher to the hiding place, showing him some wrapped meat and even a piece of liver he planned to smoke. He also pulled out a vial of venom collected from the beast's claws. Brown examined everything with delight, noting that the toxin was indeed produced inside the monster's body. He asked for samples for study, to which Iris simply rolled her eyes, unable to withstand their delight. Eliza soon approached and asked Brown what his next plans were, as they were heading to Haben.
The scientist became thoughtful, his guide had escaped, and venturing through the forest alone would mean certain death.
After some consideration, he decided to join them. Takarayama asked if he was sure of his decision.
Brown chuckled and said that while he was traveling with them, he had the chance to try new monster dishes. Eliza laughed and remarked that such dishes would be the main feature of their future restaurant. She clung to Takarayama, excitedly explaining her plans to open a branch of Nina's restaurant, where they would serve chanko. After several days of travel, they arrived in the port city of Haben. For Takarayama, it was his first city in the New World, noisy, crowded, and permeated with the scent of the sea. He noted how busy it was, and Eliza explained that Haben was the island's only port, through which all trade routes passed.
Franca added that even goods from the Noir continent could be found here. It was time to split up. Eliza went to fill out the paperwork for passage on the ship, Brown headed to the Adventurers Guild, and Franca went to the market to do some shopping. Only Takarayama and Iris remained at the pier. He asked her what she was planning to do. The girl hesitated, but noticing how passers-by turned and whispered as they looked at the half-naked wrestler, she offered to buy him some clothes. Takarayama was embarrassed, but agreed. They entered the nearest store. The clerk eyed the wrestler with disapproval and offered him a shirt, pants, and a vest, the largest size available. The clothes barely fit, clinging tightly to his shoulders and chest. Iris asked him with a smile how he was feeling, and Takarayama admitted he hadn't worn anything like that in a long time. When the seller named the price, Iris frowned. Taking out her abacus, she began haggling, insisting that the set wasn't worth the asking price. The seller tried to justify himself, but under pressure from the girl, he agreed to lower the price just to get rid of them quickly. As he left the store, Takarayama noted Iris's natural business acumen. At that moment, a barker's cry echoed down the street, praising Haben salt, one of the 3 best in the world. The wrestler's curiosity was piqued. He approached, pushing aside curious passers-by. The merchant, noticing his imposing figure, called him brother and offered to try the city's finest product. Takarayama nodded, clarifying that he had high standards for salt. The merchant smiled smugly and sprinkled some white crystals onto his palm. After tasting it, the wrestler frowned. The salt was too harsh. He stated this bluntly, causing a storm of indignation among the merchant and his assistant. They shouted that he understood nothing and was insulting the pride of the city by not understanding the subtleties of taste. Takarayama remained calm and confidently declared that he could recognize high-quality salt by its taste. The assistant, smiling, offered to test his claim. 3 plates with different salt samples were placed on the counter and it was explained that only one of them was of the highest quality. If the wrestler guessed correctly, the merchant promised to apologize and kneel before him. Takarayama concentrated, carefully examining the crystal structure. He took a pinch from the first plate, tasted it, then the second and third. He paused for a moment, as if contemplating the taste, then looked up and pointed decisively at one of the plates. His pupils dilated, he sensed the purity of the taste, barely touching his tongue. The salt was clear, smooth in shape, without any undue bitterness, the epitome of the highest quality. The merchant paled. Takarayama had chosen correctly, it truly was heart and salt. The wrestler calmly added that this wasn't just one of the top 3, but the best salt in the world. The surprised merchant asked who he was that he could tell by just one taste. Takarayama chuckled and said salt had been his companion his entire life. In the ring, he always licked the salt before about to sense whether the day was a success or a failure. It was with this salt that he rose to the top of sumo. The assistant flared with anger, accusing the merchant of hiding such a valuable commodity. But the merchant merely shrugged. Salt is rare and difficult to obtain. Meanwhile, Iris quietly tugged at Takarayama's hand, uneasily pronouncing his name and clinging to him. She confessed to feeling uneasy among the many men at the port. Takarayama agreed and jokingly asked if they shouldn't be at work at that time. The assistant sighed and explained that no one was going out to sea, the route was closed. Ever since the monster had settled off the coast, even seawater had become impossible to obtain. Then Eliza and Franca ran up to them with sad news: ships to the Noir continent had been stopped, and trade was frozen. Brown appeared next, beaming like a child, delighted, announcing that a sea monster had taken up residence nearby. The scientist rejoiced at the rare opportunity to observe the monster, but the others cried out that this was no cause for celebration. Brown awkwardly scratched the back of his head, realizing he'd said too much. Takarayama realized that the monster was the reason the town was isolated. Fishermen couldn't catch fish, and merchants suffered losses. His assistant complained that without the sea, life in Haben simply stopped. Takarayama asked what kind of monster had taken up residence near the port, and at that very moment, a scream echoed through the city: the monster had reappeared. People ran out into the streets in panic. They all rushed toward the embankment. A huge tail flashed across the water, kicking up a wave. A moment later, a gigantic shadow appeared above the surface. A huge body emerged from the foam,
resembling a fish with webbed fins and a toothy mouth. Brown watched in awe, while Eliza, on the other hand, turned pale.
The monster dove back, raising a wave of water.
The scientist assumed it was a sea king, a predator native to the open oceans. Eliza exclaimed angrily that it had chosen the worst possible place to wander. Brown explained that perhaps it had followed the ships and gotten off course.
One of the dock workers shouted in frustration as he wondered when the monster would finally go away. At that moment, Eliza called out to Takarayama.
The girl approached him with a pleading look in her eyes and asked for help. Franca, beaming with pride, immediately announced to everyone that this man had defeated a killer bear with his bare hands. The people around him gasped, looking at him with respect and hope.
Takarayama was embarrassed and admitted he didn't know how to fight in the ocean.
But looking at the people, he saw faith, not fear, in their eyes. He understood that he was their only support right now. Clenching his fists, he cast aside his doubts.
How could a Yokozuna say I can't if he hadn't tried? He straightened up and declared that he would try.
The townspeople greeted his words with a roar of delight. Fishermen, merchants, and adventurers gathered at the pier.
Everyone brought nets to help.
When someone pointed out that the net was too small, Takarayama explained his plan: tie them into a single, gigantic net and drag the monster to shore. He acted confidently, making everyone believe he would succeed.
Iris suggested using her water magic to raise the monster to the surface.
Takarayama approved the idea, asking her to create a water vortex that would push the beast out of the depths.
The girl nodded, full of determination.
Just then, an old man with an eye patch approached them, tall, wiry, with a strand of gray hair sticking up. He asked if the wrestler knew how to steer a boat.
Takarayama frankly admitted that he didn't. Then the old man, introducing himself as Addy, said he'd take charge.
The crowd buzzed, everyone knew Addy's name. He'd sailed the seas for 50 years and, rumor had it, had once killed a man-eating shark with a single harpoon. Takarayama was honored to meet such a man. They shook hands and headed to the boat. From the shore, Eliza watched the boat pull away from the port. She prayed they would return alive. Brown noted that the Sea King might be swimming right underneath the boat, but Eliza only clenched her fists and didn't respond. A huge silhouette appeared beneath the water, the black body of a gigantic fish gliding right beneath them. Addy, standing at the helm, called over his shoulder, "Hold on tight, brother, it's about to rock." A low rumble came from the depths, and the water in front of the boat exploded with a splash. A Sea King rose from the waves, a colossal creature with scales that shimmered like armor.
Takarayama instantly took up position, ready for battle.
The monster's status revealed itself before the wrestler's eyes: a level 2 special attack, and loot that included red meat from its back, white meat from its belly, scales, and fins. He assessed the stats. The monster was stronger and faster than anything he'd ever encountered.
Old Man Addy shouted, asking what he intended to do.
Takarayama answered briefly, "Go to the end," and without hesitation, he rushed at the enemy, net in hand.
He cast the net accurately, wrapping it around the monster's hull.
From the shore, Eliza let out a joyful cry, but her joy quickly gave way to alarm as the fish began to struggle, writhing in the water. The Sea King thrashed about, trying to escape into the depths.
Takarayama felt the net tighten and realized he was about to lose his catch.
Without thinking, Addy grabbed an oar and threw it straight at the monster's side, distracting its attention. At that moment, the surface of the water began to boil. Iris stood on the shore, arms outstretched, her voice blending with the roar of the waves. She summoned the breath of the sea. The water rose in a column and, obeying her will, pushed the monster upward. Takarayama squeezed the net, holding the monster back, and after thanking Iris and Addy, began to guide the Sea King towards the port. The force of the pull was colossal. The wrestler's muscles tensed, the fabric of his pants split, and he became flustered, but he didn't stop. People on the pier retreated in panic, watching the enormous bulk slide toward the shore. A few minutes later, the monster crashed onto the pier, entangled in nets.
The townspeople came running, armed with spears, harpoons, and hooks.
The decisive moment was approaching. Takarayama emerged from the water, where Addy was already waiting, worried.
The old man asked if he was alive.
The wrestler was breathing heavily, but he smiled. Addie clapped him on the shoulder, calling him the savior of the city.
Takarayama modestly replied that he had simply done what he had to. There were casualties, his pants split completely at the seam, but the wrestler only laughed. They wrapped him in a towel, and he finally allowed himself to breathe after the grueling fight. A crowd gathered around the fallen Sea King. Brown beamed as he examined the gigantic body, seeing the ocean monster up close for the first time. Takarayama's stomach growled, and Eliza, grinning, asked what he'd cook this time. At that moment, a new recipe opened up before him. He announced that it was time to prepare a dish using the Sea King. Eliza and Brown couldn't hide their impatience, while Iris nervously asked if they were really planning to eat the sea monster. The merchants, their faces pale, exchanged glances. Takarayama pulled out his bundle and got to work. The first step was to remove the scales, but they were as tough as armor. He frowned, saying that a regular knife would be useless here. At that moment, Addie called out to him. The old man showed a mithril blade he'd found in the armory, explaining that it was enchanted to prevent it from breaking. It was the perfect weapon for the job. The shopkeeper protested, but Addie rebuked him, reminding him that the town owed its life to this man. Takarayama thanked the old man and tested his blade. With a single stroke, it sliced off a layer of scales. Eliza and the girls brought baskets of vegetables and allowed them to use everything they needed, including the utensils from the festival kitchens. After examining the ingredients, Takarayama decided they would make a complete dish. He began cutting meat from the monster's belly and mixing it with egg whites and herbs. Iris remarked that the process resembled making minced fish. He added the seaweed and fins to a cauldron with salt to give the broth a rich flavor. The wrestler then pulled out a jar labeled Yokozuna Chenko. He uttered the word oil, and the jar glowed, filling with golden liquid. The oil was the finishing touch. The salt merchants watched in amazement, thinking they were witnessing the ultimate magic. Takarayama carefully poured oil over the dish. A rich, delicious aroma instantly filled the air. He declared it ready. In front of everyone stood a new creation, a nutritious tayanko with salted oil from the Sea King. Those who had already sampled his dishes gulped, looking at the floating bowls. The rest stood waiting, hesitant to approach. Addie took the first sip, and everyone held their breath. The old man froze, lowered the bowl, and inhaled deeply. The flavor was so smooth and rich that words simply lost their meaning. Addie exhaled loudly, lifted the bowl, and exclaimed loudly that it was divinely delicious. The soup was light, slightly salty, and the golden oil gave it richness and depth. The old man scooped up the chanko again and again, repeating that he had never tasted anything like it. His delight was contagious. Even the salt merchant's assistant was curious about the taste. Eliza remarked that adding fat was an excellent idea, as the Sea King's meat itself was tasteless. Franca, chewing, said that the fish dumplings simply melted in the mouth, and Iris delightedly noted the crunch of fresh vegetables. Finally, the assistant gave in and tried it, and his eyes widened in amazement. No one could believe that the monster that had terrorized the city was such a delicacy. The salt merchant approached Takarayama with an empty bowl, asking for more. Takarayama, smiling, poured out portions for everyone who approached. He generously treated the girls from the merchant guild who were helping with the vegetables, and even the children running around. Eliza, showing her wits, held up a sign that read, "Additional 50 bronze coins." From Nina's shop, eliciting laughter from everyone around. The atmosphere on the pier became festive. When it was all over, Eliza and Franca exchanged glances. Now they could get to the mainland for free, since there was no question of payment after the city was saved. They both beamed with joy, looking out at the calm sea. Brown called everyone over to say goodbye. He said he was pleased to meet them and that meeting them was a rare gift of fate. Takarayama asked what he would do next. The scientist pointed to the fallen Sea King and said he would study it. It was rare, after all, to have the opportunity to study such a rare creature. They exchanged bows, and Brown promised to remember them. Before parting, he handed Takarayama an envelope, a letter of introduction to the Adventurers Guild in the port city of Maru, on the Noir continent. He said it would open doors for them and help them on their journey. The sisters cheered, knowing that it wasn't easy for an outsider to join the guild. Brown hesitated, calling it a small favor, but the best he could do. He wished Takarayama a way home. Takarayama thanked him, remembering that the title of Yokozuna and his duty to his own world awaited him. He firmly declared that he would definitely return. When one of the sisters asked about his clothes, the wrestler laughed. After the battle, there was little left of them, and now he had only a loincloth, but it was comfortable. Soon they boarded the ship, a huge one, with 2 tiers of sails, smoothly cutting through the waves. This was Takarayama's first sea voyage, and he watched in delight as the wind filled the sails. Eliza admitted that it was a first for them, too. The girls said they'd never left Kasama Island. Franca added that she'd even seen the sea for the first time. The wrestler's attention was drawn to some bags and boxes nearby, and he inquired about them. Eliza pointed to the cargo, jars of oil, sacks of potatoes, and crates of salt, all of which they'd received for free as a thank you. She beamed with pride, and the others merely exchanged grinning glances. Suddenly, the ship shook violently, the floor began to shake, and the girl screamed, clutching the handrails. Takarayama rushed to hold them back. He approached the side and saw a whirlpool swirling ahead. The bosun, running past, loudly warned everyone to hold on tight. The sea was foaming, and the waves were pounding the sides. The experienced sailor admitted he had never seen anything like it in his entire life. Takarayama held his sisters close to him to keep them from being washed away. The boat shook more and more violently until finally the bow lifted and crashed back down. A few minutes later, the storm died down. The shore appeared in the distance. When things calmed down, Takarayama asked if the girls were safe. Eliza and Iris assured him they were fine. They didn't understand what had just happened, but the main thing was that the ship had somehow reached the shore. Confused passengers stood nearby. Takarayama overheard the sailors discussing the ship's grounding. If they could push it back, the voyage could continue, but for now they would have to wait. The wrestler became intrigued and decided to check out what was happening inside. He descended into the lower compartments and was astonished by what he saw. In the center of the cabin stood a huge glass sphere, surrounded by a glowing magic circle. He asked the crew what this device was. At first, he thought it was an aquarium, but the sailors were surprised. Hadn't he ever seen water spirits? One of them explained that the vessel contained water spirits, who propelled the ship, turning it with the force of the currents. Almost all the ship's mechanisms operated thanks to them. Takarayama wondered if this seemed too exploitative. But the sailors hastened to assure him that the spirits weren't held by force after their voyages, they were released back into the sea. However, they were now exhausted. The reason was the breeding season. The spirits create whirlpools to protect their young, and this was precisely what had stopped the ship. Returning to the deck, the wrestler told Eliza they'd have to wait a bit longer. She asked what had happened, and he briefly explained the situation. Meanwhile, the younger sisters went off to look around. Takarayama relayed the sailor's words. Water spirits are small, about the size of a watermelon, and usually peaceful, but during breeding season they gather in huge swarms. Their magical energy intensifies, creating whirlpools capable of sinking a ship. This time is called the period of love, when their aura is brimming with life force. He told Eliza only that the ship was currently immobile. Eliza, looking into the water, noticed a strange fish near the side of the boat and asked if it was one of those spirits. Takarayama checked its status. It was a Putadebi, a small aquatic monster with a level 2 poisonous sting and a level 5 mud diver skill. Its loot included a fin and white meat. He explained that it was simply a sea creature, harmless, if a little disgusting. Eliza chuckled. From her appearance, she'd expected something more terrifying. Takarayama took a closer look at the fish. It resembled a Japanese platy, a member of the catfish family. He noted that after cooking, the poison disappears, leaving the fish soft and tender. His thoughts were interrupted by Eliza. She asked if she could eat them. Takarayama nodded hesitantly. The girl happily spotted a whole school of these fish and rushed to collect them with her hands, deciding it would be a great way to earn some extra cash while they were stuck there. The wrestler quickly warned her, "Don't touch the fish with your bare hands." He didn't have time to finish. Eliza screamed, feeling a sharp pain. The poison from the fin had pierced her palm. She dropped the fish and staggered. Takarayama caught her, asking how she felt.
Eliza pressed herself against him, breathing heavily. He froze, unsure of what to do, and called her name. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck, pushed him to the ground, and whispered his name.
Takayama was confused, trying to understand what was happening.
She asked him if she liked him, saying that from their first meeting she'd felt like it was destiny. The words sounded strange, her gaze was warm, but unconscious. She said she wanted to have his child.
Takayama's face flushed.
Memories of his life before this world flashed through his mind, of women he'd never had.
It all seemed like a dream.
Coming to, he abruptly pulled away and jumped up, declaring that he was unworthy of her.
Eliza reached out to him, but he turned and ran away, leaving her alone.
Furious at himself, he began grueling training. Standing on the shore, he pushed at a palm tree with his palms, forcing himself to endure the pain and repeating that he was unworthy of the title of Yokozuna. Eliza, meanwhile, came to, knocking her dress off her face. She saw Takayama half-naked and screamed, not understanding what was happening. He tried to justify himself, but she interrupted him mid-sentence. Looking down at herself, Eliza noticed her clothes were rumpled and began to straighten them in a panic. Takayama knelt, swearing nothing had happened and that he was simply trying to help her. He said he was glad she'd come to her senses, reminding her of the poisonous fin.
Eliza, still confused, admitted she didn't remember anything after the injection.
Blushing, Takayama explained that she had suddenly confessed her love to him and said she wanted a child.
Eliza froze in shock, unable to believe her ears. To ease the tension, she slapped his knee and suggested they look for Iris and Franca.
He, relieved, agreed. Meanwhile, Iris called her sister, saying that it was time to go back, because Eliza was probably worried.
Franca wasn't listening, she was digging something in the sand.
When Iris approached, the girl showed him tiny, glittering stars in her palm, like dust.
Iris admired the find, and Franca smiled.
She said she'd collected them for Elisa as a thank you for her care, though she suspected she might simply sell them.
Still, she wanted to give them a gift.
Suddenly, the silhouette of a human face appeared in the sand right in front of them. The girl screamed, not understanding what was happening, and began calling for help. Takayama and Eliza had already run, hearing their cries.
When they arrived, a creature made of sand towered before Iris and Franca, its eyes gleaming with a dim light.
Takayama saw its status, Sandman. The monster had level 1 regeneration, and its loot contained star sand. The creature raised its hand to strike. Eliza cursed and lunged forward. She leaped, grabbed the sisters, and threw them to the ground, shielding them with her body. A huge sandy palm flashed over them, but at the last moment, an unknown force stopped it, the air thickened, and the monster recoiled.
Takayama held out his hand, stopping the sand monster's blow and preventing it from touching the girls.
The sisters cried out in relief upon seeing him. A thought flashed through the wrestler's mind. For the first time, he was fighting not a creature of flesh, but a spirit, and he didn't know if this would be any different from a normal battle. He delivered a powerful blow to the enemy's torso, but the Sandman merely crumbled, leaving a gaping hole in his body. A moment later, the sand began to return, restoring his form.
Takayama froze, stunned. The spirit was invulnerable to physical blows.
Watching his opponent recover, the wrestler realized brute force was useless here. He had to figure out what was wrong with him before he destroyed them.
Irritation gave way to determination. Takayama charged into battle, but his blows passed through the enemy harmlessly.
The sandy flesh simply crumbled and reformed. The girl stood to the side, watching in horror.
Eliza desperately tried to think of something, and Iris prayed the wrestler wouldn't die.
At that moment, Franca, frowning, caught something shiny in her palms and called out to her sisters. She showed them the tiny particles floating around the Sandman.
Eliza didn't understand what she was getting at, but Franca confidently said it wasn't just sand, there were tiny spirits floating around it.
As Takayama dodged the blows, he noticed that his enemy seemed to move with a conscious, almost intelligent presence. Its strength was no greater than human, but its reactions were instantaneous. He began to understand that this wasn't a single spirit, but something more complex. Deciding the fight was futile, he grabbed his younger sisters, hoisted them onto his shoulders, and dragged Eliza along with him, pinning her to the ground so she wouldn't give them away with her voice. They hid behind the coastal bushes, breathing heavily.
Takarayama whispered that the monster was still somewhere nearby.
If it reached the ship, panic would break out. He racked his brain for a solution until Franca held out her palms, adorned with sand stars. At first, he thought it was just sand, but the girls insisted he take a closer look.
Tiny sparks glowed among the grains, miniature spirits.
Eliza explained that the Sandman was composed of precisely these creatures, united into a single body. It dawned on Takarayama, this wasn't a monster, but a cloud of spiritual energy. He recalled the sailor's words, the water spirits and the vessel were also acting in concert. Eliza blushed, clarifying that spirits were subject to emotions, and sometimes even desires.
Takarayama began to process everything he'd heard. If this spirit was similar to the water spirits, then it could be influenced in a similar way. When Iris asked what he was planning, the wrestler declared he knew how to defeat the Sandman.
He explained that the plan was based on the properties of a fish named Debbie, which they had recently seen. The sisters looked at each other, confused as to what the fish had to do with it. Takarayama explained that during reproduction, Debbie creates a vortex of aura around herself that attracts males and influences other spirits. This vortex can even stop the movement of water. Therefore, the Sandman, being a spirit, should also be susceptible to this aura. Iris suggested using water magic to push Debbie closer to the sand spirit's vortex, and Franca suggested using wind magic to prevent the monster from escaping into the sand.
Takarayama thanked them both, deciding to act immediately. Eliza asked how she could help, and the wrestler tasked her with the most dangerous task, capturing the living Debbies. Hearing this, Eliza screamed, immediately giving away their hiding place.
Everyone simultaneously tried to silence her, whispering at her to shut up. Standing up, she discovered that the hem of her dress had come loose and was suspiciously short. Embarrassed, she wrapped her hand in the fabric, vowing never to touch that fish again. Despite her fear, she rushed to catch Debbie, calling loudly for Iris to help.
Iris responded and began guiding the fish with streams of water.
Iris raised her hands, and a huge ball of water rose from the sea, with dozens of Debbies thrashing about inside. The vortex shimmered with blue light, ready to become bait for the Sandman.
Numerous Debbies floated within the water globe. Eliza watched proudly as the glowing globe shimmered, waves of aura escaping from it like shimmering hearts.
Iris paled, noticing the water receding, and Franca screamed that the magic was weakening.
Iris thought it was the influence of spirits drawn to Debbie's aura.
Eliza called out to her sister, using her name as an expression of trust and support.
Franca clapped her hands and shouted for Eliza to tell Takarayama that everything was ready. Meanwhile, the wrestler continued to distract the Sandman, leading him away from the ship. He was already beginning to tire, mentally cursing when would they finally finish their preparations.
Franca hurried him, shouting that the magic wouldn't last long. Hearing this, Takarayama stopped, turned to the spirit, and decisively slammed his palm on the ground, declaring it was time to end the game. He grabbed the Sandman's body and signaled to the girls. Franca extended her arms, creating a vortex around the monster to prevent it from disintegrating into sand. The tiny spirits that made up its body began to burst forth, rushing toward the water globe. A cloud of sand rose around it, and only a dusty trail remained in the monster's place.
Elisa and Franca watched in confusion.
Soon the Sandman reassembled, but was noticeably smaller and weaker. Takarayama stood opposite him, realizing the plan had worked, the number of spirits had dwindled, and now he could finish him off.
He rushed forward, attacking, and Franca kept the enemy from scattering. Gradually, the spirit's body shrank until it was the size of a man.
Takarayama grabbed him with both hands and began squeezing, overcoming his resistance.
The spirit, writhing, wrapped itself around his waist, trying to break free.
The girls watched the struggle in horror. The wrestler planted his feet on the ground and squeezed the enemy with his whole body, until the sandy body dissolved into thin air, leaving only a quiet swirl of dust. It was the decisive hold, his final push ended the fight. The girls breathed a sigh of relief.
Iris, holding the water ball with trembling hands, could no longer resist. there was almost no water left inside. At Takarayama's signal, she released the magic, the ball returned to the sea. The girl wearily said she couldn't bear it any longer. Everyone gathered around her. Franca anxiously asked if the monster would appear again. Takarayama confidently replied that it had disappeared forever and thanked everyone for their bravery.
At that moment, a sailor from the ship ran up to them, waving his arms. He was out of breath, but managed to explain that supplies were running low and the delay could last until nightfall.
He recognized Takarayama as the cook from Haben and asked if he could cook something here too.
But he had no ingredients on hand. Takarayama shrugged, saying that in Habana he'd cooked with a sea king, but now there was only sand around.
There was nothing to cook with it. However, suddenly his status exploded, a new level opened up. He read with surprise, Lord of the Chanko. Eliza didn't understand what it meant.
The wrestler's skills had increased, he now had access to level 2 recipes and the special ability ingredient list.
Eliza was curious about how it worked. Takarayama activated a new ability.
A voluminous list of ingredients appeared in front of him, indicating their locations within a radius of 500 meters. He studied the list in admiration, noticing hundreds of possible combinations. Among them, the word Yokozuna flashed by, a reminder of his true rank. However, part of the list remained blocked due to his low level. Down below, he spotted a new dish, the main ingredient of which was Little Debbie.
Takarayama chuckled, so the fish was edible after all.
Eliza immediately stopped him, reminding him that it was poisonous and suggesting he look for something less dangerous.
Takarayama explained that small bats, locally known as cave monsters, inhabit the east.
The girls asked him to suggest other options. He mentioned a killer ant dish, not believing such a creature could exist, and then sea slugs and taffy, which he'd never heard of. Of all the ingredients, Debbie's fish came closest. Takarayama remarked that it looked delicious, but Eliza became alarmed, reminding him that its poison was deadly. The others were confused as to why their sister was so nervous. Takarayama agreed the risk was high and wondered if the poison could be removed. A warning appeared on his status asking if he really wanted to share the recipe with Debbie.
He confidently confirmed his choice.
A poison neutralization method appeared before him, along with 2 available recipes. Thanks to his new level, he could now see full descriptions of the dishes.
He hesitated between deep-fried Debbie and pan-fried Chanko. Eliza asked what Chanko meant. Takarayama explained that sumo wrestlers use it to describe any nutritious dish, from soup to roasted meat.
So, they could start cooking. First, the poison had to be removed, cutting off the fins and stinger, then rinsing the fish, as even the mucus could be dangerous. Eliza brought salt, even though her supply was nearly depleted. After salting, the fish was thoroughly rinsed and cut into pieces. The fillets were made into nabe, and the tops were deep-fried.
Takarayama noticed the coconuts lying nearby and decided to use their juice.
He deftly split the coconuts in half, promising the result would surprise everyone.
Iris watched warily.
Then he chopped the vegetables, added them to the pot, and set it to simmer. Debbie's meat required slow cooking. He chose soy sauce for deep frying, then squeezed out the coconut juice and poured it over the fish. The sauce soaked in, imparting a mellow flavor. The batter was made from potato powder, which Eliza had brought. Once the juice had thickened, Takarayama dipped the fish pieces in it, coated them in batter, and added a pinch of miso. The final touch was frying them in hot oil until golden brown. The dish was ready, a hearty southern-style miso nabe and crispy deep-fried Debbie. Eliza eyed the food hesitantly, worried that the poison might have lingered.
Iris and Franca remarked on the appetizing aroma. Takarayama invited everyone to try it.
A debate broke out among the people, some were afraid to eat the monster that had gotten them stuck, while others insisted it was worth the risk. A few brave souls, who had tried the Sea King Chanko, stepped forward. The sisters were the first to take the plunge.
Everyone waited eagerly for their reaction. Eliza carefully took a spoonful and was surprised. The combination of miso and coconut was unusually smooth. The sweetness slowly unfolded, creating a harmonious flavor. The younger sisters happily confirmed that the meat was tender and easy to chew.
People around them praised the dish, sharing their impressions.
Then Takarayama served the fried Debbie.
Eliza hesitated again, but the others were already reaching for pieces. The fried fish looked frightening, its shape resembled something alive, and the sisters felt as if they were eating a cursed creature. However, those who tried it enthusiastically praised the crispy crust and salty flavor. Someone even remarked that the only thing missing was a glass of beer. The girls listened to their raves with surprise. Eliza watched in confusion as everyone around her ate with relish. One of the sailors pulled out a bottle and offered a drink to celebrate victory. Another reminded them that drinking was prohibited on duty, but most agreed to a little. Franca, savoring the taste, confirmed that the fish literally melted in the mouth. Eliza looked at her in bewilderment, wondering when her sister had managed to taste it. Takarayama suggested roasting the bones, turning them into thin, crispy crackers. The men approved of the idea, and one praised him for his ingenuity. The wrestler smiled and replied that he didn't drink himself, but he knew his snacks well.
People came to him for more. He poured everyone new drinks, and joy reigned all around.
People laughed, shared impressions, and even the fatigue from the voyage seemed to disappear.
Suddenly, the crowd's attention was drawn to Franca, who was showing everyone some star sand she'd found on the beach.
The girl explained that she'd wanted to give it to Eliza, but then they'd been attacked by a Sandman. Eliza turned pale and sternly scolded her sister, explaining how dangerous it was. A pair of adults, a man and a woman, approached them. The woman introduced herself as a mage and artifact maker. She explained that star sand is used in alchemy and attracts spirits, making it extremely dangerous to keep on one's person. The woman continued her story, explaining that magical tools strengthen a person's connection with spirits, and that star sand serves as an ideal conduit for this. However, she warned that if the sand attracts an evil spirit, it could attack the owner. Franca and Elisa listened with bated breath. The magician explained that when collecting sand, special containers are used to limit the spirit's power, as without protection, one could be seriously harmed. Hearing this, the sisters finally realized why the Sandman had attacked them. Franca, in a panic, tried to hide the stars she'd found, while Elisa begged her to throw them away. The woman, noticing their confusion, handed them a piece of cloth with a spirit-repelling spell and advised them to wrap the find in it to avoid further trouble. Later, when night had fallen, the ship set sail again. Takarayama stood by the side, relieved that the vessel had been repaired, but he couldn't hide his concern. The night sea seemed especially dangerous. Eliza shared his concern, recalling that ports at night usually didn't accept ships. One of the sailors approached and reassured them, informing them that the route led to Orandam, a rare night port. Everyone looked ahead with interest. Franca pointed to distant lights flickering in the darkness and quietly declared that these were the night port lights. The sailor explained that they guided ships, helping them stay on course. Takarayama watched in fascination as the lights reflected on the water. The ship approached the gateway to the continent. Lantern-bearing boats sailed along the way, illuminating the way. The sailor explained that Orandam was one of the continent's largest ports, bustling with activity around the clock. Thus they reached their first destination, the city of Orandam, greeted by the twinkling of thousands of night lights.